Today I'm going to talk about a dime store heaven in the song The Big Rock Candy Mountains. Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. So there's this really great song called The Big Rock Candy Mountains. It's a lot of fun. If you've ever seen the movie Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, I think it was featured on that. But it actually originates in the 1930s, written and originally performed by a fellow by the name of Harry McClintock. And I would play it for you, except for copyright reasons, I don't think that's a good idea. So, unfortunately, I'm going to sing it, and I'm sorry I can't give you this from a professional singer, and it'd be great if I played an instrument too. But, this will, I think, at least suffice, because it's really all about the words, and the music is just a little bit for fun. So, here's The Big Rock Candy Mountains I'll sing, and then we're going to talk about the meaning of the lyrics and this interesting thing of a dime store heaven. So, one evening as the sun went down and the jungle fire was burning, down the track came a hobo hiking, and he said, "Boys, I'm not turning. I'm headed for a land that's far away, beside the crystal fountains. So come with me, we'll go and see the Big Rock Candy Mountains. In the Big Rock Candy Mountains, there's a land that's fair and bright, where the handouts grow on bushes and you sleep out every night, where the boxcars all are empty and the sun shines every day on the birds and the bees and the cigarette trees, the lemonade springs where the bluebird sings in the Big Rock Candy Mountains. In the Big Rock Candy Mountains, all the cops have wooden legs, and the bulldogs all have rubber teeth, and the hens lay soft-boiled eggs. The farmers' trees are full of fruit, and the barns are full of hay. Oh, I'm bound to go where there ain't no snow, where the rain don't fall, the wind don't blow, in the Big Rock Candy Mountains. In the Big Rock Candy Mountains, you never change your socks, and the little streams of alcohol come a-trickling down the rocks. The brakemen have to tip their hats, and the railroad bulls are blind. There's a lake of stew and of whiskey too, you can paddle all around 'em in a big canoe, in the Big Rock Candy Mountains. In the Big Rock Candy Mountains, the jails are made of tin, and you can walk right out again just as soon as you are in. There ain't no short-handled shovels, no axes, saws, or picks. I'm a-goin' to stay where you sleep all day, where they hung the Turk that invented work, in the Big Rock Candy Mountains. I'll see you all this comin' fall in the Big Rock Candy Mountains. Okay, as I said, I'm sorry that I couldn't just show you something from a professional singer, but copyright and stuff. Okay, so it's a fun song, obviously, and it was meant to be humorous from the very beginning. At the same time, it's got some really interesting symbolic value to it, because it paints what I call a dime store heaven. It's a vision of heaven, but it's such a cheaply made one. It is not, in any sense, any sort of realistic heaven. And it's actually, in many places, self-contradictory. So I want to go through the lyrics now. And, just look at some of the bits and pieces, the lyrics I have on my phone. So it really starts with the second verse, is the more interesting part here. Okay, so in the Big Rock Candy Mountains, there's a land that's fair and bright, where the handouts grow on bushes. And this in itself is kind of interesting. And, the first portion of the dime store heaven, because there are gifts of money that grow on bushes. Why do you need, especially when you consider what the rest of this is, what are you going to do with the money, even? You have everything you want and everything you need that's just available for the taking. What would you even do with the money? And the idea of handouts growing on bushes, I'm not going to get into, if you're really interested in the economics of money growing on trees, I actually have a video all about what money is, and why it growing on trees would not work. That's just incidental. It's contained within that. I wasn't addressing the question of why would it not work for money to grow on trees. It just, if you watch that, if you don't know already and you watch that video, you'll certainly understand. Okay, but And it's also interesting that they're handouts. It's not even money grows on bushes, it's handouts grow on bushes. It's interesting. It's just taking the current perspective and just trying to make it more convenient rather than, sort of looking to something better, something, bigger. Okay. You sleep out every night. So it's convenient. I mean, that would be kind of nice. Like if the weather's so pleasant that you can just go to sleep anywhere and there are no biting insects. Doesn't specifically mention that, but, it kind of implied. That would be pleasant. Like that actually would be, in any sort of real conception of heaven, not needing shelter is in fact something that makes a certain amount of sense. That in heaven, which would actually be where everything is good, that is according to God's will, everything will work in harmony and be congruent, unlike in this fallen world. And so the idea that you would not need shelter actually would make sense here as an idea of heaven. But then we get to where the boxcars all are empty. For those who don't know, a boxcar is a car on a train where you ship goods, and one of the things back like in the 1930s, in order to not pay your railroad fare, you might try and sneak onto one of these cargo carrying railroads where you just slip in amongst the goods that are being shipped and no one sees you, and then you get to where you're going and hop off the train prior to actually arriving at the station, because they'll be going slowly for a long time, etc. And so the boxcars aren't stuffed full of things, which would also be dangerous as a side note because they could shift a little bit. But it's not, instead of the boxcars being stuffed full of things, when you want to go somewhere, you just jump into a boxcar. It's plenty open, lots of space, nothing, you can't have a boxcar that you won't fit in. But of course, why would you want to go somewhere? This is, again, one of those things, and this is why it sort of ties into the dime store heaven of just, it's now, but more, just like this, but more convenient. Well, why, if the handouts grow on bushes, are you getting on a boxcar to go someplace else? You sleep out every night, the handouts grow on bushes. Why would you want to go anywhere? So there's no purpose to this. This is just, well, it's inconvenient when the boxcars are full, so the boxcars will all be empty. So there's no integration between these ideas. And this is, again, I'm going to talk about this a little bit more, but what makes it this sort of dime store heaven. And we're going to then look into sort of how you can see dime store heavens all over the place. And they're often, by the way, just to sort of give a spoiler in a sense, a lot of political theories are essentially dime store heavens. Bad, unworkable political theories, I mean. Okay. And the sun shines every day, that would be nice, on the birds and the bees and the cigarette trees. So you'd have a tree that actually grows rolled up cigarettes. Which, I mean, is not technically, in a super technical sense, impossible. At least. And obviously, if you like cigarettes, and this is written before anyone had an idea of lung cancer, after all, that sure would be convenient, although at the same time, with everything so good, why would you need cigarettes? Why do you need that stimulant, that use of the stimulant if everything's already so good? But whatever. Okay. And the lemonade springs. Okay, it'd be nice. Like, if it's trickling along on the ground, there are some issues, maybe possibly related to bacteria and stuff. But, somehow there are just springs of lemonade. That sure would be tasty. Too much sugar for you to be healthy, but sure would be pleasant. Okay, where the bluebird sings in the Big Rock Candy Mountain. In the Big Rock Candy Mountains, all the cops have wooden legs. And the bulldogs all have rubber teeth. So I like those two because, of course, one of the things that's really kind of curious about it is in the Big Rock Candy Mountains, the police just aren't very good at their job. And the bulldogs are also not very good at their job. Now, what's kind of curious is why aren't they missing? I mean, if you're imagining this wondrous land where everything is just great, why are there any form of police there? Why do they have any kind of bulldogs, even with rubber teeth? And there's a practical side to this too. Like, who would employ the police with with wooden legs who couldn't chase anyone down? Who would bother keeping a bulldog with rubber teeth where when it bites somebody, nothing happens? There would not be any sort of purpose to these things. If they all were like this, no one would bother even having them at all. And sort of more to the point, what makes this sort of the dime store heaven is, why is your dream, why does this dream land where everything is fair and bright still have police and bulldogs? Why are you not aiming higher? That all you've got is, it's kind of better than now, by a bit. The farmer's trees are full of fruit, and the barns are full of hay. Now, what does it matter if the barns are full of hay? Because, like, the whole point is that you'd sleep in the hay, but you sleep out every night, so what's the hay for? Again, this is just like thinking of your problems and solving them in a very, very limited sort of sense, without any sort of general systemic thinking. Okay, I'm bound to go where there ain't no snow, where the rain don't fall, the wind don't blow. Now, there's a real problem actually with the rain not falling, which is, how do you plan to have drinking water? Like, if the rain never falls, what you're describing is in fact a desert. And deserts are not actually paradises. And so this again is one of those things where, I mean, you can be like California, you have a stream coming in from someplace where the rain does fall. So like Los Angeles, I mean, like, you can be an irrigated desert where the rain just falls someplace else and you just have a stream. So I don't want to overplay that. But in sort of a broader sense, if the rain never falls, you've got some problems because you don't have any drinking water. So, and if the wind doesn't blow, you'll never be able to fly a kite, by the way, just as a side note. Okay, so, now one of my favorite lines of this. In the Big Rock Candy Mountains, you never change your socks. Does that really sound like heaven to much of anyone? I mean, really? I like having clean socks, actually. I think clean socks are more pleasant than extremely dirty socks. So I find it really fascinating that, like, changing your socks is such a problem, here, that his idea of heaven involves not that the inconvenience of changing your socks goes away, but the changing of your socks goes away. Which, again, is this very limited, very narrow thinking. It's not thinking of how would this be better, like how would this be actually good? How would each thing fulfill its purpose? But rather, it's what's inconvenient about my life now, and, like, just get rid of that thing, that one thing, or what is convenient, I want more of that, without any sort of general thinking of how it's supposed to actually work. So, the little streams of alcohol come trickling down the rocks. The brakemen have to tip their hats, and the railroad bulls are blind. So people have to pay you respect. The railroad bulls, the railroad bull was somebody whose job it was to make sure there weren't people on the train who hadn't paid a fare. And so the railroad bulls are blind. Again, it's one of those, why would you bother having somebody employed to check the train for freeloaders if he couldn't possibly find them? Like, why is there a railroad bull, but he's just blind? Why not? You don't have any of this. And also, just as a sort of related note, what does it matter? Because, like, if you're in the Big Rock Candy Mountains, why are you going somewhere else? Like, it's only a problem if you can't ride for free on the train if you want to go somewhere. And as another detail, the handouts grew on bushes. So you've got an unlimited supply of money, so you can just buy a railroad fare. So again, it's all of these things, and the things that make them a dime store heaven are all of these contradictory points where each one is taken just in isolation without anything being taken to have any sort of consequences to it. Okay, there's a lake of stew and of whiskey too. That lake of stew, by the way, again, unless, like, somehow there are no bacteria and you run into problems actually with your guts because you actually need them symbiotically, but in any event, unless there are no bacteria of any kind around, that lake of stew is going to be pretty bad fairly quickly. And of whiskey too. At least a lake of whiskey is going to at least, I mean, it'll kill off anything in it. So, at 40% alcohol, eventually the alcohol will evaporate, details. But, bigger point is that 40% alcohol is, maybe the little streams of alcohol run down into the lake of whiskey, and replenish the stock of alcohol. So, like, at least that will, it'll kill you if you try to drink this instead of water, but at the very least, it's not going to kill you with, like, bacterial, growth. So, win some, you lose some. Okay. In the Big Rock Candy Mountains, the jails are made of tin, and you can walk right out again just as soon as you're in. Again, why would anyone bother making a jail out of tin? Why have jails at all if they're just made of tin and you can walk right out again? And also, what does it matter if the jails are made of tin, since the cops have wooden legs and the bulldogs have rubber teeth? And why do you have these jails at all? I mean, if you're imagining where everything is working right, like, why would there be jails instead of just these useless jails that, yeah. So, there ain't no short-handled shovels, no axes, saws, or picks. I'm going to stay where you sleep all day, where they hung the Turk that invented work. Oh, by the way, where you sleep all day. So, like, since you sleep out every night as well, you're sleeping basically 24 hours a day in the Big Rock Candy Mountains. So you don't even have time to enjoy all the stuff. Although I guess, the Lake of Whiskey will probably contribute to your sleeping 24 hours a day. Where they hung the Turk that invented work in the Big Rock Candy Mountains. For anyone who doesn't know, Turk, back when, was often used is just as a purely derogatory term. I don't know if it was actually in relation to Turkish people or not, or if that's purely a coincidence. But in any event, back in the day, to call somebody a Turk in that sort of context was simply to essentially call them bad. So that interesting thing where they hung the Turk that invented work, the idea that somebody invented work, as opposed to work is like how you go about continuing to live. Which again is just this sense in which there's no understanding of how anything actually functions here. And so it as you consider all of these things put together, what are they? They're incredibly childish. And it's a comedic song, obviously. Like this is not somebody's actual political philosophy. Harry McClintock made this song to entertain people and for fun, not as a way of like trying to instill an actual like system of government or anything. But at the same time, there's some useful similarities we can see to a lot of things that people have actually proposed without really getting into the specifics of them. You can see this in communism, for example, where on the one hand, you are solving certain problems in a way where like this thing will get better, but then you just kind of like ignore the effects of this and also just assume away all sorts of other problems. So this sort of thing, what I call a dime store heaven, is, as I said, it's a childish way of thinking, where it's childish because you're not considering things as a totality that all have to work together. You're just taking various experiences that you have and saying that you would like for them to be better. So to give an example of a sort of dime store heaven, just sticking with the communist thing, I actually saw this at one point. Somebody had seriously proposed that, in their wouldn't socialism be great thing, about like, imagine if the stores didn't charge you, you would just go and ring up the items that you're taking from the store so that the people running the store know what items to go and replenish. I guess this helps them out so they don't have to go and take stock, I suppose. And then they will just go and place the orders with the people who make the stuff, and everyone, will just supply it because you asked, and everything will just be great. And the thing is, there was no conception whatever within this description of what happens if too many people take stuff. Like if more people need whatever than is on the shelves. What happens then? No idea, no conception, no idea that there would be multiple people shopping at the store. And this is the thing, this is what makes this like a dime store heaven type of political philosophy, is that it wasn't even carrying through its own idea even a little bit. I mean, I understand that like nobody can really like work through keep an entire modern economy in their head. Fair enough. But like here, there wasn't even any real consideration for like how this would work with multiple people shopping at this store. or shop, whatever, just like coming to take the stuff that they want at this store. Like, it's the idea that there could be multiple people and maybe there wasn't as much stuff as there were people. And like, I mean, even if you assume away all concepts of greed and short-sightedness and whatever, like, what are you going to do? Like, hang around waiting for the other people who show up in order to find out, like, hey, does anybody want, these packages of tinned salmon? Or is it okay if I take them? And like, how long are you going to keep that up for? Or like, does everybody write down in the places of all the stuff that they took their like name and telephone number and like how many they have, and like, call me if you need some? I probably could spare up to this amount. Like, how on earth would that be supposed to work? And then like, when you call them from the store, you're supposed to like change it down as like maybe somebody would like reshare with some of them, again assuming that like nobody is in any way greedy or selfish or more concerned with their family than they are with you or whatever. Like, if you assume away all of those problems, just the very initial beginnings of how would you try to run something like this, like, the only way that you don't run into these problems is if you assume approximately infinite supplies of everything anyone could want. And I will admit that socialism will work just fine if you can have like a magic, some source of magic that can produce unlimited amounts of literally everything. But starting with the premise that you can produce, unlimited amounts of everything, even there, you wouldn't like write down stuff so people need to reorder it. Just magically overstock everything by that so incredible an amount that no one could possibly go through it. Solves that problem, makes everything more convenient. Like, this is where any sort of premise that you could use to try to avoid the massive complexity of thinking about this even slightly does away with what you've already thought about. And so, this is what I call, and you can see this all over. You can see all sorts of theories, whatever it is about, where clearly nobody has actually thought this thing through even a little bit. That they're just taking the thing that they have on their mind at the moment and solving it by either adding the stuff they like or subtracting the stuff they don't like, without any thought for what these things are or how they relate to anything else. They're just doing the very simple operation of assuming that there are no consequences. And that is, by the way, incidentally, an incredibly childish thing to do, because children are unfamiliar with the consequences of actions are. And I mean, like, in the simple sense of what the consequences of actions are. Like, that if you pull something off a shelf above your head, you're going to have to then hold it up. And if it's too heavy for you to hold it up, it will fall. Like, consequences in the most simplistic of senses, that, like, if you pull something off a shelf, it's not held up by the shelf anymore. That sort of thing a child has a lot of trouble seeing for the first few times. They learn that one pretty quickly. There are a lot of things, like if you touch the hot pan, you get burned. They don't know that at first. They learn that one very quickly. And so on, with various things. These are things where it is very childish to not consider what the consequences of your actions might be. Because, like, a child doesn't know about consequences. And that's why things can be so simple for a child, because they don't know enough. Incidentally, just as a side note, it's the thing about children. Children, it's not that children lack intelligence or even logic. The problem that children have, okay, there's an age of reason thing, and there's some details about that. But especially once you're past the age of reason, it's not that they lack logic, and even very young children can be quite logical. The problem is they know approximately nothing about the world, so they have nothing to apply the logic to. They have nothing. It's not that so much that children are unreasonable. They're popularly called unreasonable because they so often come to bad conclusions. But it's not that they're unreasonable, it's that they have so little material, so little experience to apply the reason to. And so they constantly come to bad conclusions because, having only a small fraction of the material they need in order to come to correct conclusions, they come to the wrong conclusions. But it's not because they reason faultily. Like, if you actually talk to them and figure out what their reasoning was, it's often valid. The problem was there's just so much stuff they didn't know to take into account that they just, so often don't go right. Which is why, of course, children are in the custody of their parents who have this experience and, help them and help them come to the correct conclusions, even though they lack the experience to, so that they, survive into adulthood. But this is where, and you can recognize this in these sorts of political philosophies, where if you just ask the person, okay, let's suppose that everything went the way you wanted to, what would this look like in practice? And they describe to you a dime store heaven. They describe to you something where the only things they can tell you about it are that the stuff they like there's more of, and the stuff they don't like there's less of. That's a dime store heaven, and it's a tip-off right away that they did not spend any amount of time thinking about this. And they do not know how real things actually work in practice. Because anybody with real experience of how complex things work in practice starts thinking about the interrelationships of these things and the consequences of the modifications that you are making to the system. So, if you spot anybody whose political philosophy, when they describe the ideal, is a dime store heaven, you're not dealing with a serious political philosophy. You're just dealing with childish wish fulfillment. And so, you go about dealing with that differently. Because the thing is, you don't argue with a child over their conclusions. You teach them the things that they're missing so that they can come to correct conclusions. And so, with somebody who has a fully fleshed out political philosophy, where they've thought about the various interrelationships and the costs and the benefits and the consequences of the various things that are going to happen, that's a person you argue about the conclusions with. You argue about how it is. You argue about whether or not these consequences will really be this, or if there's, something else. Somebody where their political philosophy is just a dime store heaven, you don't argue with them about this. It's fruitless. It's pointless. What you need to do is find out what is the knowledge about the real world that they're lacking. What have they no experience of? And then try to help them get the knowledge that they're missing about these fundamentals of how the world actually works. This may be, like getting them biographies where they learn about unintended consequences. This may be, and often, by the way, in a slightly different context, so it doesn't seem like you're just arguing with them, but like talking about like that great story, I don't know if it's true or false. Go with true ones, like do enough research to find the true ones. But like the great story about the English who wanted to get rid of cobras in India, so they paid a bounty of so many dollars for each cobra that a person brought in. Then a while later, they noticed people had started breeding cobras because, of course, it's much easier to catch all of the offspring of a cobra than it is to catch the adult cobras. You have to go looking for the adult cobras. So if you catch a few and then breed them, you have tons of cobras to go bring in to get the bounties for. I think within the story, they also noticed the cobras are all very young that people are bringing in. And then went and investigated and said, okay, we're not trying to pay people to breed cobras. That's not useful. We want to get rid of them in the wild, not have tons and tons of captive bred cobras. So we're ending this bounty program. So then what happened? Well, people had bred all of these cobras and had these large populations of cobras that they had bred in order to get paid bounties. So what they do, they release them. Because, the easiest thing to do is just, get them and they'll slither off into the bushes. And now it's not your problem anymore. So what was the actual consequence of having put together this bounty program? They increased the number of cobras in the wild. As I said, I'm not sure if this is actually a true story. It is at least a plausible story. Things like this can easily happen. There are tons and tons of things that have all sorts of unintended consequences to them. There are lots and lots of stories of unintended consequences that you can find. And so, if somebody is lacking in that, doesn't know about it, go find the actually true ones, not merely the funny ones that, I'm using it to illustrate a point. I would not use this as, the actual, as sort of an actual building block of helping to educate a person, other than introducing the concept of unintended consequences. It will do much better if you can go find like actually factually sourced ones and just keep on bringing these things to the person's attention so that their understanding of all the various ways that people have gone wrong will be broadened and increased, and they will start to, as this knowledge becomes part of them, they'll start to think about it. So that's the big conclusion about dime store heavens, is that if somebody is chasing a dime store heaven, what they need is not argumentation, what they need is education. Basic education, not political education. And so try to give them that basic education. Until next time, may you hit everything you aim at.